The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Cyber Reason webinar on the new Ursnif variant. So today's session is going to be delivered by Jacob Berry, one of Cyber Reason's principal incident response specialists, very experienced in this field. Before I hand you over to him, just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping for you. We expect the session to last somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes. And then we will go to a QA session. If you do have a question, you'll see a question panel on the right of your screen. At any point, please type in your questions and we will address them at the end of the session. Okay, that's it from me. So I'm now going to hand over to Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We've had a lot of interest in our research we've done on the new Ursnif variant we saw in the Japanese market. So today's presentation, we're going to cover some of the changes in this variant compared to the others, the new development work, as well as just sort of the functionality, the features, and the information that it steals. Before I continue, I do want to credit our Japanese SOC and our research team, especially Asaf, who wrote the blog article and did a lot of the reverse engineering work for everything they did in this research. They've done some great work, really good researchers. To start off, some key elements, some new parts of this attack. This specific variant we saw, it steals cryptocurrency from users. It uses some new techniques to check its locale and make sure it's running in Japan. And while this variant we saw in Japanese market and targeting the Japanese market specifically, we expect that the development techniques and as well as the modules that they developed for this specific variant, this campaign, to be useful. It has a new method of persistence that was different from previous campaigns, as well as adding just new capabilities in general around information stealing. We also saw the use of steganography, or masquerading and hiding code inside of imagery, and which was new to this campaign. Ursnif's been around for quite some time. We saw the first variants in 2007, so it's been around for approximately 12 years. It's one of the longer variants that's been in continuous development, as in cyber criminals are using this continuously and working on it, improving it. We saw that both the use of off-the-shelf components, as in GitHub projects and a code available online, as well as integrating components from other malware variants that were leaked, as well as custom development by different groups that use this malware. We began seeing this new specific variant, this campaign, early in 2019. Our SOC identified many of our Japanese customers being targeted by this campaign. And when we saw this, our SOC actually noted that it was different than previous campaigns and handed it over to our Nocturnus team, who does research internally. So the Nocturnus team did the reverse engineering of a lot of the malware, as well as looked at the modules and looked at the differences and compared it to different malware variants that are out there and did the campaign breakdown. So some of the main changes that we saw in this variant over previous ones, its new stealthy persistence mechanism is a last-minute persistence, which I'll cover. It has 3 new or revamped modules for stealing information: IE Stealer, OL Stealer, and TB Stealer. IE Stealer for Internet Explorer, OL Stealer for Outlook, and TB for Thunderbird. It looks for many different types of cryptocurrency or digital currency wallets on desktops to steal cryptocurrency. It also has a module for stealing disk encryption keys. It has 2 modules for bypassing common anti-phishing and security products in the Japanese market. It has enhanced targeting for specific country checks to make sure it's running in Japan. They modified the VBA code that actually did the initial checks. While that was something we did see before, this variant added on to that. It uses PowerShell to compile a .NET DLL for specific language checking, in this case to check for Japanese language packages. It added an IP geolocation check to make sure that it was physically located in Japan as well. This campaign can be broken down into 4 major stages. It's delivered through an Excel document, which is attached to a phishing email. Upon open, if the user enables VBA macros, the VBA checks for a Japanese locale setting. It sets PowerShell variables. Upon checking that, it decrypts the next payload, does an IP geo check. It fetches the stego image, which contains more PowerShell. It then downloads a Biblo downloader, injects that into explore.exe, and then the 4th and final stage, it loads Ursnif, which does further checks and downloads the core components for information stealing. So to break this into more detail, stage 1, the phishing email, contains a VBA macro. This VBA macro has a modified language check before decrypting any of the PowerShell included inside the Excel macro. Upon decryption, that PowerShell runs and does a check IP for geolocation. It uses ipinfo.io for those familiar with it. Once that check is finalized, a .NET module is compiled and stored in appdata/local/temp on Windows machines. That .NET module does a feature available in .NET libraries, uses a feature in .NET libraries. culture_info.currentCulture is the call, the function call, to check that it is running in a Japanese locale. Once all these checks are complete, so it's done 3 checks at this point to ensure it's running on a Japanese machine. The second stage, PS downloader runs, PowerShell downloader. It fetches the stego image, which has further PowerShell in it from Imager or postimage.cc. All the images we saw in the campaign too have a theme that's somewhat Japanese. The one that you can see on our blog article, for instance, has different common cartoon Japanese food. The intent of this is so the imagery would blend into anything else that would be in the temp files or in downloaded locations. The malware variant's using invoke PS image, which is a free PowerShell steganography library you can get off of GitHub. Invoke PS image actually just takes PowerShell scripts and embeds that byte by byte into the pixels of a PNG image. The script generates one-liners to execute these type of files from images either online or locally on disk. Once the PowerShell runs from that stego image, it reflectively loads a DLL into memory. And that DLL is Biblo, another malware variant, in this case being used just as a downloader. The reflective DLL loading technique, for those not familiar, is a technique where you load a DLL or a library or module from memory rather than from disk. And in Windows, that capability isn't natively built into the libraries, and you have to have something else do that capability. In this case, they're using PowerShell. Biblo and then, in turn, once it's been injected into explore.exe, downloads and runs the Ursnif first stage. Upon execution, Ursnif does several checks to make sure it's not in a sandbox environment to try to evade reverse engineering or researchers. It checks if Xeon CPUs are present, so it looks for the CPU type. This could indicate it's running in a server environment versus on a laptop. It does a check for virtualization. It looks to see if there's a mention of VBox, QEMU, VMware Virtual HD. It uses a timing check to try to force a VM exit and to thwart debuggers. And if any of these checks are true, it terminates the process. Assuming all of these checks are passed in the first stage of Ursnif, it will then decrypt and download the next modules. These modules contain the persistence mechanism, the new stealing modules, the IE stealer, the Outlook stealer, and the Thunderbird stealer, the cryptocurrency stealing, and the disk encryption stealing modules, as well as those anti-security modules to bypass Sishwall. To dive into the new persistence mechanism and how it works. This new observed persistence mechanism is based on a last-minute persistence model. This model creates its persistence at the very last moment before a system shuts down. When the system's rebooted, the loader actually injects itself back into Explorer.exe and deletes the evidence of the persistence. It removes the auto key, registry key, auto run key, along with files that are stored in app data. We've seen similar implementations in both Dridex and BBLOX banking Trojans in the past. This persistence mechanism is a little different than what we saw in previous ones reported by Cisco and other researchers. The previous techniques relied on a PowerShell script that was stored in the registry. And upon boot, it dynamically loaded that PowerShell and then injected the DLL, versus in this case, it's using the QUser APC injection technique to load the DLL. So you can see on the chart on screen is the actual persistence creation and persistence removal tactics. This malware uses an invisible window for internal communication between the components and the modules of the malware. Using this invisible window that will run, Ursnif can catch the Windows management actual queries from Windows itself. If Ursnif catches a WM_query end session message sent to the different windows running in the Windows environment, it uses this to indicate that the machine is being shut down and to create the persistence. Once it catches that WM query end session, Ursnif creates the auto run keys along with placing its files in app data. There is a key stored in the current user, software, app data low, software, Microsoft, Hive, to actually store key information about this and use that to create the persistence mechanisms. Upon boot, the loader runs and injects the core DLL to Explorer.exe. Once the Trojan runs, it checks for the existence of Program Man, which is a window inside of Explorer.exe, which helps check to make sure Explorer.exe is running. It then checks if the malware code is running from the same process, Explorer.exe. This is an anti-debugging measure to try to see if it's running in the right context. Once these checks have been verified, it deletes the keys in app data. It deletes the LNK and exe files which are created, and it does this based on that same registry key stored in current user. Similar to recent variants of Dreambow and Gozi, we saw new stealing functionality in this variant. A lot of the work they did was around the new modules, the Outlook module, the Internet Explorer one, and the Thunderbird stealer. The Outlook stealing module enumerates Microsoft Outlook accounts on infected machines. They also added support for more versions of Microsoft Outlook. Previously, they only had support for 2 versions. This variant adds that capability to steal from Thunderbird, as I mentioned. It looks for stored credentials in the logins.json file, as well as it takes a personal address book, a book.map, from the Thunderbird files. The Internet Explorer module looks for registry keys for auto-typed URLs or autocomplete URLs. It looks for autocomplete form data, including storage credentials in the registry, as well as take browsing history out of the registry. For the cryptocurrency stealing, it looks for Electrum, multi-bit HD, Bither, mSigna, JAX, as well as other common digital currency wallets. The 2 types of disk encryption keys it'll steal are Veracrypt and TrueCrypt. As I mentioned before, the variant has added more anti-security components, or components to try to bypass our security controls and preventative measures. Previously, we have seen some capabilities to bypass anti-rapport from IBM, but on top of that, this variant added anti-phish wall. Anti-phish wall is anti-man the middle, man the browser, anti-phishing module, security company, SecureBrain. The product's really popular in Japan and is recommended by a lot of the big Japanese banks and financial institutions to protect against banking Trojans. So given that it's popular to try to prevent this type of data theft, it makes sense for these type of malware variants as well as Biblo to add this capability. This module runs about 4 tests to see if phishwall is running. It checks the registry for phishwall key is present. If it is present, it locates the SB pwu.exe process and terminates it. It then checks for a second process, phishwall 5.1.exe, and terminates that process. It enumerates Firefox's browser extensions. It looks for the phishwall extension /info.asia@securebrain.co.jp.xpi, and if it finds that extension, we'll terminate the Firefox process. Lastly, it'll look through the registry for a key CLSID, which is associated with phishwall. While its other anti-rapport module is not unique or new to this variant, it is a bit rare for that module to be enabled. This module seems to be very similar to Carbib's anti-rapport module that was leaked in 2013 and available on GitHub. Summary of impact. For organizations, this would really be targeting financial information, maybe on finance machines, stealing information from Outlook, stealing potentially any R&D, trade secrets, personal data, the email correspondence, as well as gathering contact data for further phishing campaigns in the future. It'll also steal potentially employees' personal bank account information if they're using a work asset to do personal banking. I think most critically, though, it really is targeting that financial information. So a quick recap on the differences in specifically the Biblo component. The changes really are focused on ensuring that that downloader checks for Japanese settings and make sure it's running the Japanese market. It's likely that we'll see these techniques implemented for other markets as well and other locales. In conclusion, we're happy that our SOC was able to detect this quickly and respond well for our customers. It's another case of phishing as a root cause. We still have to have strong education programs for our users, but as we see, even when we have strong programs, we do see them being bypassed, users enabling this, and then the malware able to run. This campaign really highlights as well as how attackers will consistently evolve and how fast they will evolve to consistently put new modules and develop their malware to combat the security controls that we're implementing. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Jacob, thank you very much for that detailed view of the topic. We actually do have a couple of questions, so let me just kind of pull these up. First one, with more malware being localized to regions and territories, how does this change how we build our threat models or security capabilities?
Sure, thank you for the question. So depending on the nature of an organization, obviously, we should evaluate our threat landscapes and look at specific risks that might be associated with operating in a territory. But in general, if we're using a security framework to evaluate security postures, such as the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we should be able to establish preventive and detective controls that have an overarching view of a technique or capability agnostic to region. So that's sort of my perspective.
Okay, thank you for that. And second question. So this threat includes specific capabilities to circumvent preventative controls for these types of threats. What is an approach to combat this?
Sure, I think there's a couple different things. One would be capabilities such as purple teaming, for instance, where you're having a red team or a pen test and capability inside an organization work along a team, or you're a blue team. So this red team can try to bypass security controls while the blue team is actively looking at how they would detect that. So this helps both the attackers and defenders understand, within an organization, understand how security controls will react to certain scenarios. And then if you don't have a detective or preventative control, you can feed that back into your engineering architecture teams, as well as use it for your risk evaluation that your GRC program might have. Regular pen testing is another great way to continually evaluate your security program and see where there may be gaps. And the third answer to that question would be, if we look at the different components of the malware, those may be new and unique and bypass certain security controls or preventative measures, but other stages of this campaign have remained the same, and we do have good detective controls and preventative controls for it. So if we can still detect a threat somewhere else during the stack or somewhere else in the attack, the new components may be rendered useless by having detective controls somewhere else.
Great, thank you for that. And Jacob, thank you again for your presentation. For the delegates, we have recorded this session, and you will be sent a link to the recording. And it's just finally for me to say thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Yeah.